My name is Richard Coleman and I've just turned 50. People say that at this age, a man usually has it all: a stable career, a warm home, and a life partner to walk with until the end of the road.
But my life hasn't been that complete.
My wife Linda passed away 10 years ago after a long battle with illness that lasted nearly 2 years. Since that day, my house, once filled with laughter and the smell of Linda's freshly baked bread, has grown cold and empty. For a whole decade, I chose to live alone. Not because I didn't have the chance to move on, but because my heart had shut itself away. I buried myself in work, running the small company I built from scratch, specializing in cooling and refrigeration maintenance. I focused on raising my only son, Lucas, who had just turned 18 back then. I once believed that was enough: work hard, care for my son, and from time to time visit Linda's grave, place a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, and share with her a few words about life. But life has its own way of testing a man's resolve.
If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd be so happy to connect with you.
I met Emily on a chilly Monday morning in September. My office was always filled with the smell of oil and grease, the clanking of wrenches, and the creak of an old printer. That day, the HR manager called me. "Mr. Coleman, there's a candidate here for an early interview." I stepped outside and saw a young woman standing at the door. Slender build, brown hair neatly tied back, eyes bright but not naive. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman. I'm Emily," she said. I paused for a moment. The way she spoke, confident yet gentle, seemed to change the heavy atmosphere of the room into something lighter. The interview didn't last long. Emily had worked in administration at a construction company, handling contracts and difficult clients. She spoke clearly, logically, and had a habit of organizing her work with checklists. I was not someone who impressed easily, but right then I thought, this is a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. A few days later, Emily officially joined the company. Within just a week, my office had changed noticeably: calendars neatly color-coded, papers carefully filed, fewer customer complaints. Even the technicians, who usually preferred doing things their own way, admitted, "Boss, that Emily really runs things tight." I only smiled, but deep down, I knew I was lucky. Emily worked hard, was always punctual, and never once complained. During lunch breaks, she usually brought a sandwich and sat by the window overlooking the parking lot. One time, while I was struggling to change a light bulb in the meeting room, she quietly brought me a cup of coffee and said, "I made it light. If you prefer it stronger, I'll adjust next time." I laughed. "Just call me Richard." That's what everyone here does. From then on, every morning at 9:30, there was always a cup of coffee on my desk, just right. Not too strong, not too weak. Work kept me busy, but whenever I saw Emily jotting notes in her planner, leaning down to organize paperwork, or patiently answering calls from difficult clients, something inside me softened. After so many years of emptiness, I began to realize perhaps my heart still had room for a fresh breeze. Lucas, my son, was 28 at the time. Handsome, intelligent, but quick-tempered and defiant. Ever since his mother passed away, he had lived a closed-off life, often ignoring my advice. The distance between father and son had only grown. When I told him about Emily over dinner, Lucas only muttered, "How old is she?" "4 years older than you." Lucas smirked. "Did you hire a secretary or a girlfriend?" That half-joking, half-serious remark stunned me. I didn't reply, just kept eating. Under the dim yellow kitchen light, I caught a glimpse of irritation in my son's eyes. I told myself, in time he would understand. Working with Emily went so smoothly that I couldn't deny it. She wasn't just good with paperwork, she also knew how to listen. I often told her about Linda, about the days when we built everything from scratch together. Emily never interrupted. She just sat quietly, occasionally nodding like a silent companion. Gradually, our conversations went beyond work. We went to the town's farmers' market together, shared dinners at a small restaurant at the end of the street. One time, when the sky suddenly poured rain, I pulled out a tarp to cover us both. Emily held on to the corner, and her cold fingertips brushed against my hand. That touch kept me awake the entire night. I didn't propose to Emily in any romantic way. One morning, as I passed by a jewelry store, I saw a simple ring in the display case. I walked in, bought it, and that afternoon called Emily into the small meeting room. "Would you like to start a new life with me?" I asked. Emily stayed silent for a long while, then nodded. On our wedding day, we kept things simple in the backyard. Close friends, a few colleagues, nothing loud or extravagant. Emily wore a plain white dress, her eyes shining brightly. Helen, my close friend, now a lawyer, stood nearby, snapping photos and joking, "Step on the bride's dress and the picture's ruined." Lucas, however, was different. He stood at the far end of the garden, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on neither me nor Emily. When everyone raised their glasses, he raised his too, but only touched it to his lips before setting it down. My heart tightened, but I forced myself to ignore it. Emily moved into the house. She changed the curtains, added a few potted plants, and placed brighter kitchen towels. I often pretended to grumble. With all these plants, the leaves are going to be all over the floor. But at night, when I lay reading, the fresh scent of greenery made the room feel less cold. Emily woke up early, prepared coffee and a simple breakfast. In the evenings, she and I often sat on the porch, watching neighbors walk their dogs, listening to the crickets. In those simple moments, I felt as if I had grown a little younger. Lucas still kept his distance. He ate dinner quickly and often shut himself in his room.
Emily was tactful, never forcing anything.
She set aside portions for him, sometimes leaving notes. "There are tacos in the oven." Lucas said little, but I noticed he still ate them. I hoped that little by little my son would come to accept this woman in our lives. One time, when the power went out, the whole house had to be lit by candles. Emily told a story about when she used to rent a cheap apartment where the heater rattled like a train. Lucas suddenly laughed. I looked at that smile, brief but genuine, and thought to myself, maybe everything will be all right. I believed I had found happiness for the second time.
A new family, a new beginning.
What I didn't know was that within that calm, a small crack had already appeared, and one day that crack would tear everything apart. They say that in marriage, even the smallest changes can sometimes be signs of bigger storms ahead. I once thought I was too old to worry about trivial things. But as time went on, I began to notice something unusual in the rhythm of what I had believed was a peaceful, new family life. At first, I had no suspicions. Emily had always been hard-working, ambitious, and eager to expand her connections. When she said she had to meet with partners late or see clients after hours, I assumed it was just normal business. I had spent decades running a company. I knew business didn't always happen between 9 and 5. There were times I came home late myself, and Linda, my late wife, would patiently wait for dinner. But Emily was different. At first, it was just a few times a week, but soon Emily was going out almost every night. Sometimes she said it was an urgent meeting, other times that a client wanted to discuss things privately at a bar. I would sit in the living room, the yellow light shining on the family photos hanging on the wall, one of Linda and me beaming on our wedding day, another of Lucas at 5 years old holding a tiny fishing rod. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed behind me, and the house sank back into silence. I looked at the clock, 9 p.m., then 10. Sometimes it wasn't until 11:30 that I heard her car pulling into the garage. Each time she came in, Emily would smile, trying to appear at ease. "You're still up?" Sorry, the partner was being difficult. She would take off her coat, hang it neatly on the hook, and quickly head upstairs.
I forced a smile, but inside, something sank.
Not because I didn't trust her, but because it was happening far too often. One night, when Emily came home late, I went into the kitchen to pour myself some water. She set her handbag on the chair and bent down to take off her shoes. I caught a faint whiff of a strange scent, not the perfume she usually wore. This one was stronger, slightly sweet, like a man's cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. "Where were you so late?" I asked, my tone gentle but unable to hide the curiosity. "Oh, I met a client at a steakhouse on the outskirts. They wanted to discuss a new contract." I nodded, but my eyes shifted to her handbag. A corner of a receipt was sticking out. Emily noticed my gaze and quickly tucked it inside. I didn't say anything, but inside me, the seed of doubt had begun to take root. A few days later, while sorting papers on the dining table, I accidentally came across a folded receipt. The restaurant was La Maison Rouge, one of the most expensive places in the city. I remembered it clearly because I had once taken an important client there. The price of a single bottle of wine was equal to a week's salary for one of my employees. On the receipt, I saw 2 steaks, a bottle of Cabernet, and several desserts. The total was over $400. I called Emily over. "Emily, what is this?" I held out the receipt. She hesitated for a moment, then gave a faint smile. "Oh, that was with a new client of mine. They chose the place. I couldn't refuse. Don't worry, they covered the main bill. I just paid in advance." I frowned. "Paid in advance with my card?" She placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice soft. "You're too suspicious. I'll transfer it back later. It was just business entertaining, that's all." The way she said it so lightly, like a $400 bill was just an ordinary meal, made me uneasy. I wanted to believe her, but a discomfort crept in. Linda had never once used my card without asking first. One evening, Lucas walked into the living room with a beer in his hand, glancing at the empty spot where his stepmother usually sat. "She's out again?" he asked, his tone full of implication. "Yes, some kind of client meeting," I replied. Lucas let out a dry laugh. "A client? Or a companion, Dad?"
I snapped. "Lucas, don't talk nonsense." He shrugged and walked away.
But that half-smile lingered in my mind all night. Maybe I was getting old, too trusting. Or maybe Lucas had seen something I simply didn't want to see. Every time I pressed her with questions, Emily always had a ready answer. The Japanese clients only agree to meet at night. "That partner is really difficult. If I don't give in, we'll lose the contract. I'm trying to build more connections, so your company can benefit too." Her words sounded reasonable enough, but the more I thought about them, the more something didn't add up. A woman just barely over 30, dining at expensive restaurants several times a week. With whom and why?
On my birthday, I didn't hope for anything grand, just a simple family dinner.
I grilled the meat myself, opened a bottle of wine, and lit candles out on the porch. Lucas was there, but Emily sent a text. "Sorry, a client suddenly invited me to dinner."
I couldn't refuse.
"I'll be late." I looked at the table, at the 2 empty seats. Lucas shook his head slightly, raised his beer, and said, "Happy birthday, Dad. I guess she's busy."
Entertaining clients. I forced a smile, but it tasted bitter.
That night, I drank more than usual, watching the candles burn down and finally go out. Emily's late nights grew more and more frequent. I began to notice the sound of the car in the garage, the click of high heels on the wooden floor. I listened like an invisible guard in my own house. I found myself living alongside the darkness with a slow-burning suspicion. One night, close to midnight, I decided not to sleep. I sat on the porch, pretending to read the newspaper. When Emily drove up, I saw her smiling at her phone, the glow of the screen lighting up a strangely radiant face. She quickly switched it off when she saw me and hurried inside. "You're still up?" "It's cold, come in." I nodded faintly, but my heart was pounding. For the first time, I thought, maybe I should find out the truth.
I wanted to trust Emily, yet I couldn't silence the questions in my mind.
I remembered Linda, my late wife, who, whenever I went on business trips, would simply say, "Remember to stay warm." But Emily, every night she came home, always had a new story, too perfect to be true. I began keeping receipts, noting down dates and times, comparing them with the explanations Emily gave. Piece by piece, the fragments slowly formed a blurred picture. One weekend evening, as I went out to the parking lot to fetch something, my elderly neighbor across the street called out to me, "Mr. Coleman, last week I saw your wife with a young man. He looked a lot like your son." I froze. She went on, "I'm not sure, maybe I was mistaken, but the two of them were walking very close."
Laughing and talking like lovers, I forced a smile and replied casually,
"You must have been mistaken." But when I stepped back into the house, my hands trembled so badly I dropped the bag I was carrying. In my head, an alarm bell was ringing. That night, I sat alone in the living room, watching the streetlight glow filter through the window. The ticking of the wall clock echoed like hammer blows against my mind. Something was wrong. I knew it, but I didn't dare call it by name. Emily came downstairs draped in a thin robe, her gentle smile softening the air. "You're still awake?"
"Overthinking again?"
I forced a faint smile, but inside me, a silent decision had already taken root. I had to uncover the truth. They say that sometimes the careless words of an outsider can plant a deeper unease in your heart than even the fiercest arguments. I had never thought that an ordinary morning in the neighborhood could weigh so heavily on my heart. It was a Saturday morning, the sun was gentle, and the breeze carried the scent of lavender from the neighbor's garden. I was taking out the trash, planning to stop by the bakery on the way back to pick up some bread for breakfast. The neighborhood was quiet. A few families were watering their gardens. Children were playing ball in the yards. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor across the street, was trimming her rose hedge. When she saw me, she waved cheerfully, her voice as friendly as ever. "Good morning, Richard."
"Haven't seen you out for a morning walk in a while." I smiled and nodded.
"Work's been keeping me busy, you know how it is." She chuckled softly, then lowered her voice, her eyes showing a hint of hesitation. "I don't mean to intrude, but last week I happened to see your wife walking with a younger man."
"And he looked—"
"A lot like Lucas." Oh, I froze for a moment, but quickly hid it with a strained smile. "You must have mistaken. Lucas has been busy with work lately. He's hardly ever home," she shrugged, looking uncertain.
"Maybe so."
But I saw the two of them walking very close together, laughing and talking intimately. I just assumed it was an old friend of Emily's. "Don't take it too seriously." I nodded, said goodbye, and went back inside. But her words kept echoing in my head like an endless tolling bell. He looked a lot like Lucas. I sat down at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, but that morning its bitterness tasted unlike any other day. If the neighbor was mistaken, why did she mention Lucas? Out of all the young faces in the world, why did she say, "looked like Lucas"? I tried to reassure myself. No, impossible. My son may be hot-tempered, but he has never done anything against morality.
"And Emily?"
"She's my wife." But another part of me whispered, then why is she so often absent?
"Why the expensive receipts?"
And why did the neighbor see a figure that resembled Lucas? Later that afternoon, Lucas came by. He was wearing a grey t-shirt and jeans, walking past me without saying much. I noticed the way his eyes avoided mine when I asked, "Have you been seeing your stepmother much lately?" Lucas froze for a moment, then gave a faint, dry laugh. "There's nothing for me and her to see each other about."
"Strange question, Dad." The answer came too quickly, too stiffly. I suddenly recalled that half-smile of his on my birthday.
A chill ran down my spine. That evening, I invited Lucas to stay for dinner. Emily prepared spaghetti beautifully presented, yet the atmosphere around the table felt strangely heavy. I watched the two of them closely. Emily spoke cheerfully, talking about work, while Lucas only nodded occasionally, his eyes often fixed on his plate, avoiding mine when Emily stood up to clear the dishes. I caught a fleeting glance from Lucas in her direction, just for a moment, but I knew it wasn't the usual look between a son and his stepmother. In his eyes there was something hard to describe, a mixture of inner conflict and suppressed desire. My chest tightened. I told myself I was being paranoid, but that image haunted me. I thought back to Linda, my late wife. In those days, she and Lucas were incredibly close. He would run out into the garden to help her water the plants, his laughter echoing brightly. The way Lucas looked at his mother was always filled with pure, innocent love. But now, with Emily, that look was different. No longer innocent, but tinged with something darker. The next day, I stopped by the grocery store. Mr. Miller, an old friend, pulled me aside and lowered his voice. "Richard, don't be upset, but the other day I saw Emily at the supermarket with a young man."
At first glance, I thought it was Lucas. The two of them were laughing a lot, looking as close as...
Well, as a couple, I froze, trying to keep calm.
Maybe he was just a young colleague. Mr. Miller shrugged and patted my shoulder. I hope so, but eyes don't lie. I forced a smile and walked away.
But my steps felt unbearably heavy, as if weighed down by stones. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Emily lay beside me, breathing evenly, her face calm and serene. But in my mind, the neighbor's words kept echoing. He looked a lot like Lucas. Like a couple. I turned to look at Emily's face in the darkness. She was beautiful, youthful, her lips faintly curved even in sleep. And I asked myself, what if Lucas, a 28-year-old man full of vitality, was drawn to that allure? What if Emily, instead of staying faithful to me, sought satisfaction in that youth? The thought made me shudder, sweat breaking out across my skin. The next morning, while Emily was making coffee, I asked casually, "Will you be home tonight, or out entertaining clients again?" She glanced at me, her smile briefly stiffening. "You still don't trust me? It's just work." I looked straight into her eyes, saying nothing more. A heavy silence lingered. Then Emily turned away, stirring her coffee. In that moment, I realized I had reached a crossroads. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. The passing remarks had turned into a fire of suspicion, burning steadily inside me. That evening, I sat on the porch, staring at the narrow road leading into the neighborhood. The streetlights cast a dim yellow glow, shadows of trees swaying. I thought about Linda, about Lucas, about Emily. A whisper echoed in my mind. If you want the truth, you must act. You can't just sit here and listen to rumors. And in that very moment, I made my decision. I needed someone who could give me a clear answer. A detective. I never imagined there would come a day when I'd have to hire a detective to follow my wife and my son. But the rumors, the evasive looks, the expensive restaurant receipts, all of it weighed heavily on my heart.
I couldn't sleep well.
I couldn't focus on work. One morning, as I sat in my office, flipping through files without being able to read a single word, I sighed and lit a cigarette. The very thing I had quit 10 years ago. The smoke burned my throat, but the ache in my chest didn't ease. I knew I had no other choice. If I didn't uncover the truth, I would lose my mind. Helen, my longtime friend, a sharp-minded lawyer, was the first person I called. That afternoon, I invited Helen to a small cafe in town. She was the one who had witnessed me losing Linda, and also the one who supported me when I married Emily. I trusted she would give me the right advice. "Helen," I began, my voice low and heavy,
I need to know the truth. I'm afraid that Emily and Lucas...
that something is going on. Helen set her cup of coffee down and looked me straight in the eyes without mockery or surprise. "I know, Richard,
I've heard some whispers too.
and I believe the only way for you to escape doubt is to have clear evidence. What should I do? Hire a detective.
I know someone, Thomas.
He's discreet, professional, but you must prepare yourself. If the truth is harsh, will you be able to handle it?" I stayed silent for a long time. Finally, I nodded. Better that than living in uncertainty. 2 days later, I met Thomas at Helen's small law office. Thomas was in his 40s, solidly built, wearing a light blue shirt and a simple tie. His eyes were calm, observing me as if he already understood part of the story. "I need you to follow my wife."
"And my son?" I said, my voice catching. Thomas showed no sign of surprise.
He nodded and pulled out a notebook. "I'll need their schedules, their habits. You just provide the times and places they usually go. After that, leave the rest to me." I handed him a copy of Emily's work schedule, the so-called client meetings she often mentioned, and the times when Lucas usually came home to visit. "Just give me a week," Thomas said firmly. "If there's anything, I'll show you." A week of waiting felt like an entire year. I lived torn between hope and fear. By day, I forced myself to work, to smile at the employees, to sign contracts. But at night, I lay restless beside Emily, listening to her steady breathing while my heart ached. She was still gentle, still prepared dinner, still touched my shoulder as she walked past. But now, each gesture felt like a blade twisting deep inside me.
I asked myself, had these hands ever caressed my son?
Had these smiles ever been meant for him instead of me? Exactly 1 week later, my phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. "We need to meet immediately. It's important." I drove to the parking lot on the edge of town, the place Thomas had arranged. He was leaning against a black SUV, holding a thick envelope in his hand. His expression was grave. "Are you sure you want to see this?" Thomas asked. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Give it to me." He opened the envelope and handed me a stack of photographs. The first photo, Emily and Lucas in a car. Daytime. They sat close together.
Heads leaned in as if whispering something.
The smile on Emily's lips was not the smile of a stepmother. The second photo, they were holding hands as they walked into a small restaurant on the outskirts. Not a fancy place, but somewhere discreet, quiet. The third photo, the entrance of a budget hotel. A dim neon sign flickered above.
Emily wore a coat, Lucas a baseball cap.
But no matter how they tried to hide, the happiness in their faces, in their eyes, was unmistakable. My hands trembled, my heart pounded wildly.
"No, this can't be,"
I whispered. Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder.
"I'm sorry."
But I followed them for 3 days straight. This isn't a coincidence. They met several times, always choosing secluded places. I collapsed into the car seat, my mind spinning. All the hope, all the trust, shattered in just a few photographs. Emily, the woman I once believed, was my second chance in life. Lucas, my own flesh and blood, my only son, both of them were betraying me in the most repulsive way I could have ever imagined. What should I do now?
I asked, my voice trembling. Thomas looked at me calmly.
You have 2 choices. 1, confront them immediately. 2, let me continue to follow them and gather more solid evidence.
I think you'll need more proof. This truth is too shocking, and few would believe it from just a handful of photos. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Yes, I need more.
But God, I don't know how much longer I can endure. Thomas met my eyes with sympathy.
Richard, you're not alone.
I'll stand with you until the end, but you must be prepared. Truth is never gentle. That evening, I returned home. Emily was in the kitchen smiling, asking me what I wanted for dinner. Lucas had sent a message. "Dad, how are you? I'm busy with work, so I won't be home this weekend." I stared at the screen, my hand tightening until my knuckles turned white. The images from earlier that day flashed again in my mind. Thomas's words echoed. This isn't a coincidence. I forced a faint smile at Emily. I'm tired.
I want to go to bed early. In the dark room, I sat alone for hours, staring into the void.
I heard Emily's laughter drifting from the kitchen, and suddenly it felt harsh, unfamiliar. That night, I realized my life had entered a new chapter. I was no longer Richard Coleman, the man who believed a second marriage could bring happiness. I was Richard Coleman, the man betrayed by both his wife and his son. And to move forward, I needed more of the truth. Thomas had opened the first door.
I knew there were many more waiting for me to step through, doors that could expose everything, even if the price would be my heart shattering to pieces.
After receiving the photos from Thomas, I felt as though I were walking through a dense fog. Everything became meaningless: meals, work, even Emily's familiar laughter. One evening, I invited Helen over to the house. We sat in the living room, the yellow light casting shadows across the old wooden table. Emily was meeting a client, and Lucas had said he was busy in the city. The house was frighteningly quiet. Helen looked at me, her eyes reflecting concern. I told her everything: the photos, the sleepless nights, the sweet lies. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse.
As if I had cried without being able to shed a single tear. Richard, she said slowly.
Those photos are enough to stir suspicion, but not enough to stand as legal evidence. If you want the full truth, you'll need proof that cannot be denied. What more do I need, Helen? They held hands, went to hotels. Isn't that clear enough? Your son could deny it. Emily could cry and explain it away. But DNA never lies. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Do you have any item that Emily gave Lucas? Letters, gifts?
Anything that might hold biological traces. I fell silent.
In my mind, a memory flashed like lightning. I remembered the navy blue handkerchief embroidered with the letter L, the one Emily had given Lucas for his birthday last year. She had even told me, "It's just a small gift, so Lucas knows I treat him like my own son." I shuddered. The next evening, when Lucas came home for dinner, I quietly observed. Emily set the stew on the table, smiling as she served, her eyes flicking quickly toward Lucas, just enough for me to sense something unusual in that glance. After the meal, Lucas left his jacket in the living room. When everyone had gone to bed, I quietly went downstairs. In the pocket of his jacket, I found the navy blue handkerchief neatly folded.
A faint scent lingered. Not the spray of a man's cologne, but the familiar fragrance of jasmine that Emily always wore. My hands trembled as I folded the handkerchief and slipped it into my own pocket.
I felt as though I were betraying my son, but the truth needed to be uncovered. The next morning, I asked Helen to take the handkerchief to a private laboratory in the city, where she knew a trusted colleague. 3 days of waiting felt longer than 3 months. I still had to maintain a normal appearance. Emily kept smiling. Lucas still called me Dad with warmth, but all I could hear was lies. Every night I sat in my office, staring at the family photo taken in front of the porch.
Emily's arm was linked with mine. Lucas stood beside us, his face beaming.
I wanted to tear the picture apart, but instead my trembling hands held it tightly. On the 4th day, Helen called. Her voice was brief. "Richard, I have the results. You need to meet me immediately." I drove to her office. On the table was a carefully sealed white envelope. Helen pushed it toward me, her eyes reflecting deep compassion. "I have to warn you, this will change everything." I opened the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper filled with numbers and medical terms. The final line, printed in bold, read, "The results show that the biological traces on the handkerchief match the DNA of Emily Coleman. This finding confirms intimate physical contact." I read it over and over, my mind exploding. The paper trembled violently in my hands. I collapsed into the chair, my hands clutching my head. In that moment, the whole world seemed to spin. Lucas, my own flesh and blood.
Emily, the wife I trusted.
They hadn't just betrayed me. They had shattered every boundary of morality. Helen sat beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Richard,
I'm so sorry."
but at least now you know the truth. You have to think about your next step. You can't go on pretending to be blind." I didn't answer. Tears welled up, but wouldn't fall. All my emotions felt frozen. When that night I came home late, Emily asked, "Are you all right? You look so tired." I looked at her and forced a smile. "Yeah, just work." She stepped closer and placed her hand on my shoulder. The faint scent of jasmine perfume rose up, making me nearly gag. I brushed her hand away lightly, pretending to be in a hurry. I need a shower. In the bathroom, I stood under the running water for hours. The hot stream poured over me, yet all I felt inside was an icy chill. I remembered the times when Lucas was little, the two of us fishing together by the lake. I remembered Emily's embrace on our wedding day, believing she would fill the void Linda had left behind. Now it all felt like nothing but a cruel joke. For many days afterward, I lived like a two-faced man. By day, I still smiled, had dinner with them, made small talk. By night, I clutched the envelope of test results, reading it over and over, each time like a knife slicing into my heart. Once, when Lucas stepped into my office and said, "Dad, you don't look well lately. Is something wrong?" I looked straight at him. In my eyes, there must have been a flicker of fury, but I forced a smile. "It's nothing. Just busy." He had no idea that every gesture, every word of his now only deepened my pain. One night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. A man with salt and pepper hair, sunken eyes, trembling hands. Was that still the Richard Coleman I once knew?
I whispered, "You let your wife betray you.
You let your son betray you.
And now you just stand and watch?" I slammed my fist against the mirror.
The glass cracked, blood streaming from my knuckles, yet I felt no pain.
I only felt one truth. I could no longer remain silent.
Beckham, the DNA results had severed the last thread of denial. There were no excuses left, no possibility of a misunderstanding. Emily and Lucas, they had gone too far. And I, Richard Coleman, was no longer the blind husband, the blind father.
I was a man utterly betrayed, and I knew the storm was coming.
The house that evening was eerily quiet. I sat in the living room, the yellow light falling across my face, a glass of wine nearly empty in my hand. The DNA results in my coat pocket burned like a block of fire against my chest. I knew I could no longer stay silent. I waited until Lucas walked in. He had just driven home, looking tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw Emily in the kitchen. They exchanged a fleeting glance, the very look I had seen in the photos in Thomas's report, and now it unfolded right before my eyes. I set my glass down hard on the table. "Lucas, we need to talk." He hesitated, glancing at Emily as if for permission, then stepped forward. Emily rinsed her hands, wiped them quickly with a dish towel, and sat across from me. I drew in a deep breath. "Son, I know everything," Lucas frowned.
"Dad, what do you mean?"
I pulled the envelope from my pocket and slammed it onto the table. The paper slid out, its cold words cutting like a knife. "The DNA results." "Stop pretending!" Lucas looked down, his face turning pale.
He stammered, "No." "Dad, this is just—" I growled. "This isn't gossip.
"It's not staged photos."
This is scientific truth. You and Emily—"
The air in the room froze. Emily shot to her feet, her voice trembling. "Richard, you're misunderstanding." "I've never betrayed you."
"This paper—"
"There must be some mistake." I turned and looked her straight in the eye. Her gaze darted away, her hand trembling as it clutched the dish towel. "A mistake? Then explain, Emily. Explain why your DNA showed up on something Lucas kept." She fell silent, lips quivering, then sat back down. Suddenly, Lucas burst out, tears spilling over. "Dad!"
"You don't understand. Emily loves me, not you."
My heart shattered. I slammed my hand on the table, my voice breaking. "Son, what did you just say? You call this woman, my wife, the love of your life?" Lucas collapsed to his knees, clutching his head.
"Dad, I didn't want this."
"But we can't stop."
"Can't you see?"
"She and I, we have a bond you never had." Emily rushed forward, placing her hand on his shoulder, trying to silence him.
"Lucas, stop talking."
But I saw it clearly. Her trembling hand, her eyes avoiding mine. I stood, my voice hoarse. "Emily, do you have anything left to deny?" She inhaled, her face taut, then slowly shook her head. "Richard, I
was wrong."
"But you have to understand, it's not as simple as you think." I laughed bitterly, a dry, broken sound.
"Not simple. You betrayed me with my own son."
And you call that not simple? Emily wept, but didn't dare come closer.
I never meant to hurt you. This
This was just a mistake of feelings. Lucas came to me when I was lonely, when you were busy with work.
I lost my way, Lucas shouted, his eyes bloodshot. No,
This isn't losing our way.
this is real.
Dad, you never understood Emily the way I do. You never listened to her the way I did. I stared straight at my son. Lucas, you are my flesh and blood.
I raised you, loved you, taught you every step. And this is how you repay me?
He bowed his head, sobbing.
Dad, I'm sorry, but you don't choose who you love. Emily seized on his words, trying to twist them into justification. Richard, believe me, this is over. I'll end it. I'll stay with you. I looked at them both, my heart in agony, but my eyes cold as ice. No, you've already chosen.
And tonight I choose too.
I will no longer be the blind man in my own home. No one dared speak another word.
The living room fell silent, broken only by the ticking clock, each tick like a blade cutting into time.
I didn't sleep after that night.
The hallway light streamed through the crack of my office door, illuminating the family photo of the three of us taken in front of the diner at the square. Me, Lucas, and the empty space that remained. I hadn't hung up any photos of Evelyn, my late wife, for a long time, not because I forgot her, but because I tried to learn how to move on. I thought I had succeeded until I found myself standing before the wreckage named Emily and Lucas. I knew if I only shouted, only blamed, everything would sink into denial. What I needed was a truth they could not turn away from. And to get that, I had to stay calm, to act as they had acted. The next morning, I cooked breakfast. The scent of bitter coffee mingled with the zest of orange peel I had grated.
Lucas came down to the kitchen, his eyes swollen.
His shoulders tense as if bracing for a verdict. I placed a plate of eggs in front of him, my voice unnervingly calm. Even I barely recognized it. Eat, then come to the workshop with me. Lucas looked at me suspiciously. Dad, last night I said too much. I understand, I replied. We're all human. Mistakes are real. But family deserves a chance. He lowered his head, muttering a thank you. I heard Emily's light footsteps at the top of the stairs. She paused for a moment, then entered the kitchen carrying the familiar scent of vanilla perfume. I didn't lift my eyes. I've left some coffee for you as well, I said, setting down a third cup. Emily placed her hand on the back of a chair and whispered, Thank you, Richard. I gave a faint smile. I have contracts to sign today. Might be home late tonight. The two of you, make yourselves comfortable. On their faces, a flicker of surprise and unease crossed.
I understood.
The illusion of forgiveness is the easiest rope to tighten. I sat in my car outside the workshop parking lot and called Thomas. His voice was steady, dry, and cautious, as always. I need definitive proof, I said.
Not for exposure.
But so no one can deny it anymore. Are you sure, Richard? Thomas hesitated. Once you reach that point, there's no turning back. We've already passed the point of no return. All right, I'll set a schedule, prepare the cameras, and... He paused briefly. Let me repeat, I won't be involved in any reckless moves that put anyone in danger. Proof, yes, but safe. I understand, I replied. The rest I'll handle myself. In the rearview mirror, I saw my own eyes, darkened but alert. The feeling was both cold and burning, a silent fury mingled with a deep sorrow for my own son. That night, while I pretended to stay busy at the workshop until late, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. Don't wait. Lucas and I are eating out. After the period, there was a limp little smiley face. I replied, All right, be back before 11. An hour later, Thomas sent me a photo taken from a distance. Lucas driving the pickup truck, Emily in the passenger seat, a baseball cap pulled low. I zoomed in, their hands intertwined beneath the dashboard, a careless detail, but enough to tell me they had let their guard down. I took a deep breath. The plan was slowly shifting into my favor. I needed two things. A place secluded enough for them to feel safe, and a reason for them to choose it. Thomas rented a short-term apartment on the edge of town, thick walls, dark curtains, parking hidden from street cameras. The contract described it as a studio for a photographer. "How will you get them there?" Thomas asked. "I'll make Emily think it was her idea." I placed a fake client file in the household email account, a supposed project for designing kitchens for a small restaurant chain. On the last page, a note read, "The investor only meets in the evening. Requests to meet at the photo studio to view composite countertop samples." I set the suggested appointment for Friday night, the day Lucas often used the excuse of running deliveries for the workshop. On Thursday evening, just before dinner, I casually dropped the bait. "You mentioned wanting to shoot some promotional kitchen photos. Tomorrow the Green Hill studio has a slot open."
I can't make it.
"Take Lucas with you to check the countertop samples for me." Emily hesitated.
You trust me?
I looked straight at her.
Of course, she nodded, quickly masking the flicker of excitement behind a blink.
Lucas lowered his head, flipping his fork, fingering the edge of his napkin. I could almost hear the inaudible sound of a trap closing. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I called Helen from the balcony. "The wind carrying the lingering scent of old snow. I don't need you to act as my lawyer just yet."
I just need you to stand there as a witness when the curtain finally falls. Helen was silent for a moment.
"Richard, I understand why you've chosen this path. But promise me one thing, don't do anything that could cause real harm. What you need is justice, not an accident. I promise," I said, and I meant it.
I wouldn't embellish, I wouldn't direct, I wouldn't describe what shouldn't be spoken aloud.
Just enough for them to be caught in the very net they had spun. The net of lies. After hanging up, I stood for a long while, gazing at the scattered yellow-lit windows across the street. Somewhere people were watching TV, arguing, kissing, reconciling, then arguing again. Life went on, noisy and careless, even as my own house was splintering apart. All day, Lucas avoided my eyes. Emily seemed unusually busy, changing outfits twice before settling on a simple dress with a long coat. She left me with a faint trace of perfume and the words, "Don't stay up late." I nodded with the faintest smile. 12 p.m., Thomas reported. "They've left the house."
I'm following. 8:43 p.m., the first photo. The studio door open, warm yellow light spilling out.
Emily was smiling, turning her face toward Lucas in the parking lot. Lucas raised his hand to lock the car, his head tilted slightly toward her. I drove around to the back of the building, stopping in the service alley where Thomas had arranged to meet. In my coat pocket I carried a folder of documents, contracts, emails, receipts, along with a USB holding the photos from the previous week, and, something I would never describe too specifically, a prop that, if chosen to be used, would turn the situation into the most humiliating one possible.
I didn't need it to cause pain. I only needed it to make things undeniable. Thomas gave the signal as he fixed the last hidden camera.
He whispered, "Audio's good."
Video's good.
"Are you sure you want the police involved?" "I already called an officer I know in the precinct," I replied. "They'll only come in when there's a reason." "The reason will appear." Thomas looked at me, and for a brief second his eyes showed sympathy. "I wish there were a less painful way." "There isn't," I said, truthfully. The sound in my earpiece came through as if I were standing right behind the wall. The click of the lock, Emily's soft laugh. "It's nicer than I expected." Lucas, "Told you. We'll just look at a few samples and then leave." A pause. Then the scrape of a chair across the floor. Their whispers. Emily's, "Shh." The sound of lips meeting. No need to see it to know. I gripped the back of the metal chair in the alley, my heart both frozen and burning. I refused to let my imagination wander further. I checked my watch.
5 minutes, 7. Then another sound, confusion, a faint, unnatural hiss.
Emily's voice, "Wait."
This, it,
Lucas panicked. "Damn it."
don't move.
The crash of a chair tipping, objects clattering. Thomas lifted his eyes to mine, no words needed. I sent a single word to Helen. Come. The officer I had called beforehand was waiting at the corner. I handed him the folder along with a brief statement. Suspicion of adultery, property rented under my friend's name, concern about unlawful entry and disturbance. He nodded. The administrative grounds were sufficient to knock and request a security check. We stood outside the studio. Thomas switched off his shoulder light. I took a deep breath. The officer knocked firmly. Police, open the door. We need to check due to a noise complaint. Inside, silence held like a breath. Then Emily's strained voice, No.
No, it can't be, Lucas growled. Don't open it. The officer knocked again, more forcefully. Open the door, or we'll be forced to enter under regulation. The lock turned.
The door cracked open a few inches, then stopped abruptly as if caught by something unseen. I pushed once, wouldn't budge. The officer asked permission, then applied more force. The door burst open. The ceiling light cast down over the messy room. Chairs askew, fabric samples scattered. Emily and Lucas stood frozen in the middle of the floor, their clothes still on, but dishevelled enough to leave no doubt about what had just happened. As for the rest, I won't describe it because it isn't necessary and it shouldn't be, but their faces said it all, contorted in the kind of caught moment that was both pitifully absurd and devastating. No blood, no injury, but enough to shatter any attempt at denial. Helen walked in slowly, setting her bag down, eyes fixed firmly ahead. Thomas said nothing, only adjusted the camera angle. I heard my own voice, strange and unfamiliar. So, this is the room you chose for your evening of reviewing countertop samples. Emily trembled, her voice breaking. Richard?
Lucas stepped half a pace forward as if to shield her. Dad, stop! Don't turn this into a public disaster. I looked at my son, the man who once stood beside me on the scaffolding of the workshop roof, laughing until his face turned red after dropping a hammer. Where was that boy now?
In front of me stood someone else, flustered, irrational, more pathetic than hateful. The public disaster wasn't created by me, I said evenly.
I only opened the door. The officer cleared his throat.
Ma'am, sir, we received a disturbance complaint. I ask that you keep things quiet, and... His eyes swept the room. Then he politely stepped back. My advice is, settle this privately. Do you need medical assistance? Emily's face flushed crimson. She shook her head violently. Lucas clenched his teeth. Helen opened her bag, her voice calm yet merciless, like a velvet-sheathed blade. Before you settle privately, I have something for you to sign. This is a voluntary statement acknowledging the inappropriate relationship, copies of transactions made with Richard's card for your personal expenses, Emily, and a petition to secure assets in advance of divorce proceedings. There's also a letter requesting that Lucas step down from his interim management role, pending review by the internal committee for conflict of interest. Sign or don't, it's your choice. But the cameras have recorded. The witnesses are here, and the court doors will be open Monday morning. Emily collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Lucas looked around, desperately searching for a way out, but there was none. Lucas whispered, Dad, what do you want from me?
Look at yourself, I replied.
If you want to keep a shred of dignity, sign, then step away from the workshop for now, go through treatment as scheduled by the health department. I'll cover the costs, but you will no longer touch the company accounts. Emily shook her head, her voice breaking. I
never took your money. I only
borrowed. Helen let out a quiet scoff. In accounting, borrowing means nothing without repayment. Emily burst into tears, the cry of someone who knew the road had ended. Lucas slumped into a chair, reaching out toward her. Yet again the very reflex that had destroyed everything. Don't, I said. At least not tonight. Don't. We managed to extract them from that humiliating situation without causing further harm. No one needed an extra physical scar to remember. The officer discreetly turned his face away, Helen draped a cloth over them for modesty, and Thomas stepped out into the hallway. Everything was handled cleanly, coldly, and in silence. 5 minutes later, 3 signatures lay on the table, Lucas's, Emily's, and mine, as witness. Helen gathered the documents, zipped up her bag. "Tomorrow morning at 9, she said. Court Street office."
"Don't be late." Lucas didn't lift his head. I'll be there." Emily nodded, her lips pale. When we stepped into the hallway, the night wind slapped against my face.
I leaned against the wall and let out the longest sigh I had taken in months. Thomas handed me a bottle of water.
"Is it over?" "Not yet," I said.
"But the net has closed." Helen draped a heavier coat over my shoulders, squinting into the distance. "You won't sleep tonight, but tomorrow morning you'll be able to stand. Thank you." I looked down at my hands, the same hands once calloused from mortar and wood, now trembling slightly.
"It's strange, Helen. I thought I would feel triumphant, but I don't. All I feel is sadness."
"Sadness down to the bone. That's the sign you're still yourself," Helen replied softly. My house was dark. I didn't turn on the living room lights. I sat down in the old armchair Evelyn once loved, my back pressed against the worn fabric, the fireplace crackling softly. On the table lay another old photo, Lucas at 12, standing on a football field, crooked tooth showing, sweat glistening on his nose, holding up a trophy.
I placed my finger on that photo. "I'll bring you back, Lucas," I whispered, as if speaking to the shadow of time.
But not by covering things up. By letting the light shine straight in, my phone buzzed. A message from Helen. "Get some sleep."
9 a.m. Court Street, I typed back. "See you tomorrow." Then I leaned back, closed my eyes.
In my ears the sound of the wind. In my chest, a piercing ache mingled with a strange, liberating emptiness. I was no longer blind in my own home.
I'd never known a night to feel so long.
That entire day I did only one thing, wait. Wait for Emily and Lucas to walk themselves into the trap I had prepared. A fine mist of rain fell. The town was wrapped in a haze of moisture, the streetlights casting pale yellow halos like the watchful eyes of hundreds of unseen witnesses. Thomas had set up the cameras in the rented apartment that afternoon. All the equipment was in place, one camera in the living room, a small one hidden on the bookshelf in the bedroom, plus an audio recorder. The signal streamed directly to the tablet in my hands. Helen was there too, sitting quietly in the back seat, silent as a shadow. "Richard," she whispered, "are you certain you want to see it with your own eyes?" I nodded. "I need to see it. If I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life haunted by the words, 'What if?'" 8:37 p.m. The headlights of Lucas's pickup swept across the narrow lane. I saw Emily's figure step out in her light dress and coat, smiling, quickly pulling up her hood. Lucas opened the door for her like an awkward gentleman. On the screen, the door camera clearly showed them entering, their hands secretly intertwined. Helen drew in a sharp breath. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. There was no doubt anymore. They weren't guarding themselves anymore. When the living room came into view, Emily slipped off her coat, tossed it onto the chair, and gave a soft laugh. "See?"
"I told you this place is private." Lucas gently wrapped an arm around her waist, whispering, "I just worry Dad will find out." "He trusts me," Emily replied, her eyes glimmering.
Blindly, I felt my throat tighten. Helen placed a hand on my shoulder, giving it a light squeeze. Then they sat on the couch. The kisses began, hurried, frantic. I turned my face away for a second, but forced myself to look back at the screen. I needed to etch the truth into my memory, so I would never again falter in the face of their denials. 10 minutes later, the room erupted with chaotic sounds. Then suddenly, Emily's terrified scream, "Lucas!"
It's not right." Lucas shouted too. Damn it, what's happening?
The clatter of objects crashing, their frantic struggling, growing more panicked by the second. The faces on the camera were twisted with fear and humiliation. They were trapped in their most intimate moment. I clenched my fists tightly. Just as I had foreseen, no violence, no injury, only the absolute nakedness of betrayal. I nodded to Thomas. He signaled to the officer waiting in the hallway. The pounding knock echoed, "Police! Open the door immediately!" Inside, everything went silent.
Then Emily screamed, "No! Don't open it!" Lucas cursed.
But the door was no longer their ally. The officer turned the lock and shoved hard. The door flew open. Light flooded in. I entered last, with Helen beside me. Before our eyes, a scene no words could ever erase. Emily and Lucas, frantic, their clothes disheveled, faces twisted in panic. The two of them trapped, unable to stand, unable to sit, their eyes filled with both terror and pleading. I heard my own voice echo through the room. "So these are the business meetings you told me about?"
Emily burst into tears. "Richard, it's not what you think.
Lucas cut her off, shouting, "Dad, I love her. She loves me, not you." Helen pulled out her phone, holding it up before them. "Everything has been recorded. Photos, video, words. There's no room left for denial." Emily collapsed to her knees, sobbing, "Don't do this."
I'm begging you."
I stood in silence. I felt no triumph, only a hollow, gut-wrenching pain. The officer spoke softly. "I'm required to file a report. Mr. Coleman, Ms. Helen, do you want them taken to the station?" Helen answered for us. "That won't be necessary. We only need the paperwork confirming our presence and the evidence. The rest will be for the court to decide." I nodded. "That's right."
I don't need them behind bars. I only need the truth laid bare." Lucas clutched his head and screamed, "You've ruined me, Dad! You never understood me."
Emily trembled, trying to pull at Lucas's arm. "Let's go."
"Let's just go."
But they couldn't leave. Standing before them were me, Helen, the officer, and the blinding truth captured on camera. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "You destroyed yourselves."
"I only opened the door to let the light in." Emily collapsed into a chair, sobbing without sound.
Lucas stood as if bound, his eyes filled with both hatred and despair. We stepped outside. Helen collected all the data and handed me a USB drive.
"Keep this."
"Tomorrow we'll submit it to the court." Thomas nodded. "You did what you had to do. But be ready, the storm won't end here." I looked back at the closed door. Behind it were two people I once called family. Now they were nothing more than two lost souls, trapped in the very mistakes they had chosen. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove around town, down the familiar streets, past the cafe where Evelyn used to love sitting, past the high school where Lucas once played basketball. All the memories came rushing back, blending with the bitterness inside me. Helen called. "Are you all right?" I let out a dry laugh.
"All right? How could I be?
"But at least—"
I'm no longer blind." When I got home, I sat down in the armchair in the living room.
The wall clock struck midnight. I held an old photo, Lucas at 14, grinning brightly after a victory.
I whispered, "Son?"
"I wish you could remember who you once were." The tears fell, not for Emily, but for Lucas. I knew that tomorrow would bring a new battle, divorce papers, the company board, the judgment of the town. But tonight, at least, I had achieved one thing, the truth. It was brutal, but it was freeing.
I couldn't sleep after that night.
The image of Emily collapsing to her knees and Lucas shouting, "She truly loves me, not you,"
kept circling in my mind.
Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the clattering, the cries for help, the panicked screams from that small suburban apartment. I had thought that once the truth was revealed, I would feel relief. But in reality, I didn't. It was like a storm had ripped the roof off my home, leaving only a bare skeleton exposed to the whole town. The next morning, the news began to leak. I hadn't planned for it to spread so quickly, but in this age, all it takes is a phone and a few seconds to share. A neighbor passing by when the police entered the apartment had recorded a few short videos. The clips were blurry, but clear enough to recognize Emily and Lucas in their humiliating state. In just half a day, the whole town was buzzing. At the corner cafe, I overheard the murmurs. Is it true that Lucas, with his stepmother?
My God, Emily. I always thought she was such a decent woman.
Poor Richard. What did he do to deserve such betrayal? I quickened my pace, trying to avoid the curious stares, but everywhere I went, the whispers followed. It was as if the whole town had turned into a public courtroom, and I, the victim, had also become an object of scrutiny. On that afternoon, Helen called me. Her voice was heavy with sorrow. "Richard, I just got word.
Lucas has been admitted to a psychiatric hospital.
The doctors say he's unstable, at risk of harming himself." I was stunned. No matter the anger, no matter the disappointment, he was still my son. I drove straight to the hospital. In the stark, white room, I saw Lucas curled up on the bed, his hands loosely restrained by medical safety straps. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt after just one night. "Son?" I whispered. He looked up, his eyes wild, filled with both pain and resentment.
"Dad, you destroyed me."
"You made the whole world know."
"I have no face left." I stepped closer, wanting to place a hand on his shoulder, but he recoiled, shouting, "Don't! You don't understand anything. Emily loves me. I need her, not you." I froze in place.
No words could save it. The doctor gestured for me to let him rest. I stepped back, my heart breaking, and left, carrying with me the image of Lucas collapsed, no different from a child abandoned in the middle of a storm. While Lucas was sinking into crisis, Emily faced another storm, the storm of public opinion. Within days, the local newspaper blared headlines, "Young wife betrays husband in incestuous affair with stepson." Alongside were stills from the cameras, photos Thomas had provided that had been leaked to the press. The entire town dove into gossip. On social media, people branded Emily with every venomous word: evil woman, family predator, monster stepmother. I heard that the fashion company she freelanced for immediately terminated her contract. Friends avoided her. Even at the market, vendors waved her away, wanting nothing to do with her. Emily had become the very symbol of disgrace in this small town. One evening, I saw her standing across the street, disheveled, crying out, "Richard,
"Please listen to me. I didn't mean to. I need you to believe me."
I stayed silent, not stepping forward. Helen stood beside me, shaking her head slightly. "Don't. She'll drag you down one more time." The next day, Emily was gone. I heard she had left town, moving in with a relative in another state. No one stopped her. But if Emily was scorned and Lucas collapsed, I didn't escape either. Walking down the street, I still heard the whispers. What a pity. But didn't he see it coming? Any man goes blind when he falls for a younger woman. A few of the company's clients came by, cautiously asking, "Mr. Coleman, would it be all right if we paused the contract for a few months?" Just until the press dies down. I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. But when the office door closed, I sank into my chair, feeling as though the career I had built over so many years was now trembling on the verge of collapse. Fortunately, I still had Helen. That steadfast friend was always by my side, her voice firm. "Richard, you did the right thing. You chose truth, not lies. No matter how painful, truth is the only path that gives you, and even Lucas, a chance to survive." I asked her, "Will I lose everything, Helen? My son, my marriage, my dignity?" She looked me straight in the eyes. "You've lost much, but you've kept one thing, yourself. You didn't let them steal your integrity. One evening, I parked my car outside the park. The street lights stood quietly. Crickets chirped in the grass. I sat staring at the lake, remembering Evelyn, my late wife. If she were still alive, would my family have fallen apart like this?
I whispered, "Evelyn, I'm sorry."
I was too blind. Tears fell onto the steering wheel, blending into the night. A week later, I was called to the hospital. Lucas had just suffered a severe breakdown, and the doctor recommended he be placed in a mandatory psychological treatment program for at least 3 months. When I entered, he wasn't screaming anymore.
He only whispered, "Dad, it's all ruined, isn't it?"
I gripped his hand, though it trembled violently. "Son, we both made mistakes, but you'll have another chance. We'll start over," he wept, tears that came too late. But I knew my son had collapsed, yet he wasn't completely lost. Emily vanished from my life. Lucas began his journey of treatment, and I walked beneath the pitiful and scrutinizing gazes of the whole town. I once thought I had lost everything, but then, in the wreckage, I realized a truth. I had just escaped a tragic marriage, a black hole that could have swallowed my entire life. On a weekend night, I stood in my empty office looking out at the sky. I told myself, there are truths so cruel we don't want to believe them, but truth frees us from lies. That autumn, yellow leaves covered the path leading to my house. The home that had once echoed with laughter was now so silent I could hear every tick of the wall clock. A few months had passed since the night everything exploded. Emily had vanished. Lucas was in a psychological treatment program. And I remained with myself, with my work, and with an emptiness that was hard to describe. Yet strangely, it was that very emptiness that opened the way for me to find myself again. I began learning to live as a single man again at 50. It wasn't easy. No one sat across from me at dinner anymore. The glass of red wine felt lonely when it was only me lifting it. I once thought I would collapse from the solitude, but little by little I rediscovered a simple rhythm of life. In the mornings I woke up early and walked around the small town. I'd meet a few neighbors. Some gave me a nod, others avoided my eyes. At first, I felt ashamed, as if I carried a stain the whole town could see. But then I realized I wasn't the one who caused this tragedy.
I was the one who dared to expose it.
And that over time allowed me to hold my head high again. I threw myself into the company. Helen helped me rebuild trust with clients. She stood beside me in many meetings, explaining frankly, Richard has nothing to hide. He chose the truth, and that's why we still trust working with him. Hearing that, many partners returned. I became busy again, with contracts, with plans, with the sound of keyboards clicking. And in those hours of hard work, I found myself forgetting the pain, if only a little. One afternoon, the hospital called. "Mr. Coleman, Lucas wants to see you." I went. He looked thinner than before, but his eyes were less wild. Lucas hesitated, then said, "Dad."
"I'm sorry. I don't know how things went so far. I only know I was weak. Emily took advantage of that." I held his hand, my chest tight with emotion. "Son, we both made mistakes."
"But you still have your whole life ahead of you."
"Let the past stay behind." That night, for the first time in many months, I slept peacefully.
Though the future was still uncertain, I knew I hadn't lost Lucas. One Sunday morning, I drove to the cemetery where Evelyn, my late wife, rested. I sat by her grave in silence for a long time. Then I spoke softly, "Evelyn."
I stumbled. I let our son fall astray.
"But now I will stand again."
I will live with integrity, the way you always wanted me to live.
Thank you for giving me a family, for giving me memories to hold on to when I lost my way. I felt a quiet peace spreading through me.
As if Evelyn had heard and forgiven me. Gradually, the town stopped gossiping.
People began inviting me again to community gatherings, to church suppers. I sat with them, listening as they talked about harvests about baseball, about their kids. No one mentioned Emily or Lucas anymore. That silence wasn't forgetfulness. It was the small town's way of giving me a chance to start again. One elderly woman stopped by the cafe where I often sat, placing her hand on my shoulder. "Richard, you're stronger than I thought. Not everyone has the courage to face the truth." I smiled. For the first time, a smile that felt truly at ease. I began learning new things. I joined a cooking class on Friday nights. I signed up for guitar lessons at the community center. I even adopted a little dog named Max. He clung to me so much that every time I came home, the silence was no longer frightening. Those seemingly small things became my medicine for healing.
I realized that life doesn't end after a fall.
It simply turns to another chapter, waiting for me to keep writing. One evening, I sat in front of the screen, turned on the camera, and recorded a few words to share on the personal channel Helen had encouraged me to start. I looked straight into the lens, into the eyes of people out there somewhere, people who had also been betrayed, who had also been broken by those they trusted most. There are truths so cruel we don't want to believe them, but truth frees us from lies.
I lost much, a marriage, my reputation, my trust. But I also regained one thing, myself.
If you are in the dark, don't be afraid. Step into the light no matter how much it burns, because the light, at the very least, will show you the way. I turned off the camera, my heart unburdened. That night, I sat beside Max, drank a small glass of wine, and felt a strangely simple happiness. I never remarried. I chose to live alone, to focus on my work, and to spend time with Lucas as he recovered.
And most importantly, I focused on myself, a Richard Coleman, no longer blind, no longer running away, but one who dared to face the truth, no matter how cruel it might be.
If you, the one listening to this story, have also gone through betrayal, believe me, you are not alone. I had to lose everything before I realized that sometimes loss itself is the beginning of freedom. Do not fear the truth. Do not fear standing alone, because in that very moment of solitude, you will discover who you truly are. As I write these lines, the autumn wind blows again outside, carrying the scent of wild grass and damp earth. I sit by the window watching the golden light stretch across the small street, and I know though the past is full of wounds, I still have a future.
A future where I, Richard Coleman, will live as my true self.
My dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, I invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts or your own experiences. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue to listen, to tell, and to live through stories together, stories that may be yours, or perhaps someone you once knew.